Hey everyone, welcome back. So if you're watching my channel, chances are you're familiar with the Raspberry Pi. You probably even have one on your network running Kodi or RetroPie or maybe Pi-hole or something. But in this video, I'll show you how to take your Pi on the go with you by turning it into a fully functional tablet using a kit called the Raspad 3. Raspad started as a successful Kickstarter project that grew into this kit, and it contains everything you need to turn your Raspberry Pi 4 into a touchscreen tablet. And full disclosure, they did send this kit to me for free to demo on this channel, but I'm not being paid to give any opinion about it one way or another. So I'll try to be as objective as possible, but my rule is that I wouldn't have accepted a product like this if I didn't already find it interesting. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at what this kit comes with. This is the tablet body itself with a 1280 by 800 capacitive touchscreen and built-in battery. There's an adapter to supply power and charge the battery, a little SD card extender and tilt sensor, which we'll need to install in a bit, a fan so your Pi doesn't overheat, some cables that'll go inside the tablet to connect everything, some heat sinks and screws, and a screwdriver. So you won't need any tools or any parts other than a Raspberry Pi 4 and an SD card. This is what the main case looks like. It has a breakout for Ethernet, a few USB 3 ports, a full-size HDMI port, a headphone jack, the power supply socket, and if you flip it over, there's a micro SD port, a power button, volume and brightness buttons, and a battery charge level indicator. Then if you rotate it to the top, there's a slot for a GPIO breakout cable, so you can still connect things like hats or a breadboard if you want to use those pins for your projects. Pretty cool stuff, but the real question is, how hard is it to put together? Well, it does come with a user manual, and if you flip through it, you can find all of the components with pictures all labeled and step-by-step instructions to walk you through everything. As far as Raspberry Pi kits go, this is honestly one of the most thorough user manuals I've seen. And their online documentation is even better. First, you take out the 5 screws in the back to remove the cover, and now we can see the fun stuff. So here are the internal components. We have a 3.2 thousand milliamp hour lithium battery. We've got stereo speakers for built-in audio, and this is the main expansion board that connects everything together. Plus this little peripheral board is for the SD card and buttons and stuff. To put it together, you basically just connect all of the cables to your Pi. It's pretty straightforward. The trickiest part was connecting this little ribbon cable for the SD card. It's just sort of a tight fit to get it lined up, but otherwise pretty simple. Then you secure the Pi with these screws, plug this little I2C tilt sensor into the GPIO pins, attach the fan to the case, plug it in, and that's it. Then you put the case back together and you've got yourself a tablet. To make sure it works, I'll go ahead and plug it in and start charging the battery, but I don't want to turn it on yet because there's no SD card to boot from. So now I need to take my SD card over to my laptop to install an operating system. I'll start by testing out Raspad Os because it was specifically made for this device. So you go to raspad.com, go to the support tab and click download, and download that zip file. When that's done, you extract it, and then you have this little image file. Now open up the Raspberry Pi Imager program. If you have a Raspberry Pi, you should be familiar with this process. Anytime you write an operating system to your SD card, it looks like this. So click Choose OS, go down to Use Custom, find that image file, select the SD card, and click Write. That'll install the operating system on the SD card so we can plug it into the Raspad and boot it up. When it boots, you should get a screen like this. And the first time you boot it, you'll need to configure some things. So you need to set the time zone and the language. Then it reboots, and there you go. Raspad OS is basically the standard Raspberry Pi OS, with some custom settings to work with the tilt sensor and to make the touch UI a bit easier to use. So I've already set up my Wi-Fi here, and I can open up Chromium and start browsing. One thing I will say is that the default on-screen keyboard isn't very user-friendly. It pops up in weird places and just feels clunky. The online documentation for Raspad recommends using a program called Onboard, which is pretty easy to install, and once you get that set up, it's a much nicer user experience. They also show you how to set up long touches to function as right clicks, which is really useful. I don't know why these two things aren't set up in Raspad OS by default. Hopefully they will be in future releases, but it seems like they're still refining the software side of things right now. On the upside, they do provide really good documentation on their website, so if something doesn't quite feel right out of the box, I recommend checking there because, like these, it's probably an easy fix. And of course, you can always use a USB or Bluetooth keyboard like this if you need to type a lot of stuff, and it makes for a decent little development system. Here I have Arduino installed, and I can program my Arduino or ESP32 boards directly from this Raspad. And here I have a mouse and keyboard plugged in while using Steam Link to remotely play the game The Long Dark from another laptop on my network. And as long as you have a good connection, the streaming performance is actually really playable. Of course, if you don't want to run Raspad or Raspberry Pi OS, you can install almost any Raspberry Pi operating system. For instance, here I've installed the Omnirom Android Os, which basically turns this thing into an Android tablet. And so far my experience with this has been really good. It has a small collection of supported apps that all feel really well integrated, but then you can also install F-Droid and have access to a ton of open source Android apps. It feels more polished than the Raspberry Pi OS to me, and I think that's just because Android was designed with touchscreens in mind, whereas the default Pi OS feels more like a desktop. Web browsers like Chromium, Firefox, and DuckDuckGo all run really nicely on Android. The only downside is that it doesn't detect the Pi's orientation, so if you want to switch between landscape and portrait mode, you have to do that manually in the settings. If you plan to use the Raspad for gaming, I would recommend either RetroPie or Laka. Again, you'll have the issue of it not detecting your screen rotation, but otherwise everything works great. And if you want to stream movies or shows from your personal library, you can always install Kodi. I usually install it as a RetroPie plugin so I can have both, but you can just install LibreElec if you just want Kodi on its own. All in all, this Raspad makes for a pretty nice user experience. It's got good screen resolution, accurate touch, the battery life lasts at least a few hours between charges, probably longer depending on what you're doing. They say it lasts for up to 5 hours, and for light usage that sounds about right. And yeah, it's thicker than a normal tablet, but that also allows it to stand upright on its own, plus the peripheral options alone make it worth the extra thickness. I mean, how many tablets out there have 3 USB ports, let alone Ethernet? The only complaint I have is that I don't really think Raspberry Pi OS is the best option for a touchscreen device. They definitely improved it with their Raspad OS, so I would go with that instead of the default Raspberry Pi version, but it still doesn't feel as natural as something like Android or Kodi, which were clearly designed to be simpler interfaces and not entire Windows-style desktop environments. I'll probably use Android and Kodi on mine more than anything else, but I'll keep an eye on the Raspad OS project because they could definitely do some cool stuff with that in the future. So yeah, big thanks to the folks at Raspad for sending me this. I put links to all of the hardware and software and documentation in the description. Also, a big thanks to you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time.